The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the ancient stone floors. William stood motionless in the corridor, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the portrait of his grandmother that had hung there for decades. The weight of recent events pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy cloak he couldn't remove. It had been 3 weeks since the diagnosis. 3 weeks since the world had shifted beneath their feet, leaving them scrambling for solid ground. The doctors had delivered the news with clinical precision, their words falling like hammer blows in the sterile hospital room. Kate had gripped his hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white, but her face remained composed, regal even in the face of uncertainty. The palace staff moved quietly through their duties, their usual chatter replaced by hushed conversations and meaningful glances. Everyone knew something was wrong, though the official statement spoke only of routine procedures and temporary adjustments to the royal schedule. The truth was far more complex, far more frightening than the carefully worded press releases suggested. William's phone buzzed against his chest. Another message from his private secretary about rescheduled appearances and postponed engagements. The machinery of monarchy continued to turn, but the human heart at its center was struggling to keep pace. He thought of his children, blissfully unaware of the storm clouds gathering around their small world. George had asked that morning why Mummy looked so tired, his innocent eyes searching for answers that William wasn't ready to give. Kate appeared at the end of the corridor, her steps measured and deliberate. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back in the understated style that had become her trademark. To the casual observer, she appeared perfectly composed, but William could see the subtle signs of strain around her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she approached. They had agreed to keep their fears private, to present a united front to the world and their family, but in these quiet moments between public appearances, the mask slipped just enough to reveal the very human couple beneath the royal titles. Kate reached him and took his arm, not speaking but communicating everything through the simple gesture. Together, they walked toward the private sitting room, where difficult conversations had been taking place with increasing frequency. The room held memories of happier times, family gatherings and quiet evenings spent away from the public eye. Now it had become a sanctuary, where they could allow themselves to feel the full weight of their circumstances without the burden of royal protocol. The diagnosis had come as a complete shock. Kate's routine medical examination had revealed something unexpected, something that required immediate attention and careful monitoring. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic, speaking in percentages and treatment options, but the very fact that such conversations were necessary had shaken them both to their core. William had always known that their lives would be subject to public scrutiny, that their joys and sorrows would become shared experiences with the nation. But nothing had prepared him for this particular challenge, this test that would require them to balance personal vulnerability with public duty. The irony wasn't lost on him that in trying to protect their privacy, they were inadvertently creating more speculation and concern. The children's voices echoed from somewhere deeper in the castle, Louis's laughter mixing with Charlotte's gentle corrections to her younger brother. Normal sounds of family life that had taken on new significance since the diagnosis. Every ordinary moment had become precious. Every routine interaction weighted with the possibility that things might change. Kate settled into her favorite chair by the window, the one that caught the afternoon sun and provided a view of the gardens where the children often played. William took his place beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched, a small anchor of physical connection in the uncertainty that surrounded them. They had learned to communicate without words during their years together, to read each other's moods and needs through subtle gestures and shared glances. Now this skill had become essential as they navigated the complex emotions that came with their new reality. Fear mixed with determination, hope battled with worry, and through it all, their love for each other and their family provided the steady foundation they desperately needed. The afternoon brought a stream of visitors, each one requiring a different version of themselves. The private secretary who needed decisions about upcoming events, the security detail who required updates about travel plans, the family members who deserved honest conversations about what lay ahead. Each interaction demanded energy they weren't sure they possessed, emotional resources that felt increasingly depleted. But it was in the spaces between these obligations that their true strength revealed itself. In the quiet moments when Kate would reach for his hand without looking, or when William would adjust a cushion behind her back with unconscious care. These small gestures of love and support had become their lifeline, the thread that connected them to hope when everything else felt uncertain. The evening news carried reports about their reduced public schedule, royal correspondents speculating about the reasons behind the sudden changes. The palace's communications team worked tirelessly to manage the narrative, to provide enough information to satisfy public curiosity while protecting the family's privacy. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant attention and careful consideration. As darkness settled over the castle grounds, William and Kate found themselves alone again. The children settled for the night and the staff retreated to their quarters. The silence between them was comfortable now, no longer filled with the urgent need to process and plan. They simply existed together in the moment. Two people facing an uncertain future with nothing but their love for each other and their determination to weather whatever lay ahead. Kate's head found its way to William's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions to make, and obstacles to overcome. But tonight, in the safety of their private world, they allowed themselves to simply be husband and wife, two people holding on to each other in the storm. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and hope mixed with fear. William walked beside Kate as they made their way to the oncology department, their footsteps echoing off the polished floors. The security detail maintained a respectful distance, their presence necessary but unobtrusive. Kate had insisted on walking, rather than using the wheelchair offered by the nursing staff, her determination to maintain dignity and normalcy evident in every step. The treatment center was unlike anything they had experienced before. Despite the palace's best efforts to ensure privacy, other patients and their families couldn't help but notice the unusual security arrangements and the hushed conversations among the medical staff. Kate had worried about this, about inadvertently disrupting the healing environment that others desperately needed. But the staff had assured them that the other patients found their presence somehow comforting, a reminder that illness doesn't discriminate based on title or status. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the lead oncologist, greeted them with the warm professionalism that had made her one of the most respected specialists in her field. She had treated everyone from factory workers to celebrities, and her approach remained consistent regardless of her patient's background. This quality had been one of the deciding factors in choosing her to lead Kate's care team. The consultation room was decorated with soft watercolors of landscapes and healing gardens, an attempt to soften the harsh realities that were discussed within its walls. William and Kate sat side by side, their chairs positioned so they could maintain eye contact with both the doctor and each other. The medical terminology that had seemed so foreign just weeks ago was becoming part of their daily vocabulary. Kate's treatment plan was aggressive, but hopeful. The medical team had caught the cancer early, and the prognosis was encouraging. However, the coming months would be challenging, filled with chemotherapy sessions, radiation treatments, and the inevitable side effects that would test her physical and emotional reserves. William listened intently as Dr. Mitchell explained each phase of treatment, taking notes that he would later share with their children in age-appropriate language. The first chemotherapy session was scheduled for the following week. Kate had researched extensively, reading medical journals and patient testimonials, preparing herself for what lay ahead. She had always approached challenges with meticulous planning, and this situation was no different. Lists of questions filled her notebook, concerns about timing treatments around royal duties, and worries about how to explain her appearance, changes to the children. Their security team had worked closely with the hospital administration to develop protocols that would protect Kate's privacy while allowing her to receive treatment without disruption. A private entrance had been arranged, and treatment times were scheduled during off-peak hours to minimize the chance of unwanted attention. The goal was to create as normal an environment as possible within the extraordinary circumstances. The drive back to Windsor was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts about the road ahead. Kate stared out the window at the countryside rolling past, thinking about the seasons that would change during her treatment, the milestones she might miss, the way her body would transform in the coming months. William's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, his mind racing through contingency plans and worst-case scenarios he couldn't voice aloud. That evening, they gathered their children for a family meeting. George, Charlotte, and Louis sat on the large sofa in their private sitting room, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they couldn't fully understand it. Kate had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, trying to find the right words to explain cancer to young minds without causing unnecessary fear. She spoke simply and honestly, explaining that she was sick and would need special medicine to get better. The medicine might make her tired and change how she looked, but it was going to help her fight the illness in her body. The children asked questions with the directness that only children possess, wanting to know if Mummy would lose her hair, if she would still be able to read bedtime stories, if she was going to die. William watched Kate navigate these impossible questions with grace and honesty, never minimizing their concerns but also not burdening them with fears beyond their understanding. She promised that there would always be someone to take care of them, that Daddy would be there every step of the way, and that she was going to fight as hard as she could to get better. Louis, still too young to fully grasp the situation, climbed onto Kate's lap and declared that he would share his favorite teddy bear to help make her feel better. Charlotte, more perceptive at her age, asked if this was why they had been spending more time at home lately, why some of their planned trips had been canceled. George, already beginning to understand the weight of royal responsibility, wanted to know if he should be doing more official duties to help his parents. The conversation lasted well past their usual bedtime, but nobody seemed concerned about disrupted schedules. They ordered pizza and watched a family movie, creating a pocket of normalcy in what felt like an increasingly uncertain world. Kate absorbed every moment, storing up these memories of her children's laughter and innocent chatter, knowing that the coming months would test all of them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Later, after the children were finally asleep, William and Kate returned to their bedroom and faced the practical realities of the situation. Kate's wardrobe would need to be adjusted for comfort during treatment. Their official schedule would require extensive revision, with many engagements postponed indefinitely. The communications team would need to craft statements that informed the public without revealing more than was necessary or appropriate. But perhaps most challenging of all was learning to live with the uncertainty that now colored every future plan. Events that had seemed guaranteed now carried the qualifier if treatment goes well. Holidays that had been eagerly anticipated were now viewed through the lens of recovery timelines and medical appointments. Kate pulled out her journal, a habit she had maintained since childhood, and began writing about this new chapter in their lives. She wrote about her fears, her hopes, her gratitude for the medical team that would guide her through treatment. She wrote about William's strength and the way he had stepped up to handle responsibilities she could no longer manage alone. Most importantly, she wrote about her determination to fight this battle not just for herself, but for her family and for all the people who looked to her as an example of resilience and grace. The last entry of the evening was simple, but powerful. Tomorrow we begin the fight, and we will face it together. The chemotherapy suite at the London hospital had become an unexpected second home over the past 2 months. Kate settled into the familiar reclining chair by the window, the one that offered a view of the small garden where she often watched birds during her treatments. The nursing staff had learned her preferences for the room temperature, which magazines she enjoyed, and how she liked her tea prepared during the long sessions. William arrived just as the IV was being prepared, carrying a thermos of soup from the palace kitchen and the latest batch of get-well cards that had been screened by security. The children had insisted on making their own cards this week, with Louis's crayon drawing of a rainbow and Charlotte's carefully written message, "Mummy, you are braver than any princess in any story." The treatment room had gradually filled with small personal touches over the weeks, a soft throw blanket that Kate's mother had knitted, a playlist on William's phone filled with music that helped pass the time, and photographs of the children that the nursing staff had helped them arrange on the small side table. These items had transformed the clinical space into something more personal, more bearable. Sister Margaret, Kate's primary nurse, was a woman in her 50s who had been administering chemotherapy for over 20 years. She had developed an intuitive understanding of when patients needed encouragement, when they needed silence, and when they simply needed someone to hold their hand while the medicine did its work. With Kate, she had learned to gauge the difficult days by the tightness around her eyes and the way she held her shoulders. Today was proving to be one of the harder sessions. The cumulative effects of the treatment were becoming more pronounced, and Kate's energy levels had been particularly low all week. She had managed to attend a brief virtual engagement the day before, but William could see the effort it had required. Her public appearances had been carefully managed, timed around her treatment schedule and designed to be as low impact as possible, while still maintaining her connection with the causes she supported. The anti-nausea medication made Kate drowsy, and she dozed intermittently throughout the treatment. William used these quiet periods to catch up on official correspondence and speak with their private secretary about upcoming schedule adjustments. The Palace communications team had become expert at managing the delicate balance between transparency and privacy, releasing just enough information to address public concern while protecting the intimate details of Kate's medical journey. During one of these quiet moments, William's phone buzzed with a message from George's teacher. Their eldest son had been struggling in school, not academically but emotionally. The 8-year-old was having difficulty concentrating and had been asking his teacher repeatedly when his mother would be all better. The teacher had gently suggested that perhaps a school counselor might be helpful in giving George tools to process his worries. William shared this news with Kate during a moment when she was alert and comfortable. They had both been watching the children carefully for signs of stress, trying to maintain as much normalcy as possible while being honest about the situation. The decision to involve a counselor felt both necessary and heartbreaking, another reminder of how far-reaching the impact of illness could be on a family. "He's trying so hard to be brave," Kate whispered, her voice affected by both emotion and the medication, just like his father. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Dr. Mitchell appeared in the doorway with a warm smile, making one of her regular check-ins during treatment sessions. She had developed a practice of timing these visits for when patients might be feeling particularly vulnerable, offering both medical updates and emotional support. The latest test results were encouraging. Kate's body was responding well to the treatment, and the tumor markers were continuing to decline. Dr. Mitchell spoke cautiously but optimistically about the progress, explaining that they were ahead of schedule in terms of the response they had hoped to see. However, she was careful to emphasize that they were still in the middle of the journey, with several more months of treatment ahead. Kate's questions had evolved over the weeks of treatment. Initially, she had focused on medical details and treatment protocols. Now her concerns centered more on practical matters: when she might feel strong enough to attend Charlotte's school play, whether her hair would grow back in time for the family's traditional Christmas photographs, how to explain to well-meaning friends and family that looking good didn't necessarily mean feeling good. The hair loss had been one of the most visible and emotionally challenging aspects of the treatment. Kate had prepared for it intellectually, even having several beautiful scarves and hats selected in advance. But the reality of seeing clumps of hair on her pillow each morning had been harder than anticipated. The children had been remarkably adaptive, with Louis declaring that Mummy's headscarves made her look like a beautiful pirate queen. William had surprised her by shaving his own head in solidarity, a gesture that had moved Kate to tears and prompted Louis to ask if he could have the same haircut. The photographs of the family with their matching short hair had somehow leaked to the press, creating a wave of public support and admiration that had both touched and overwhelmed them. As the treatment session drew to a close, Kate felt the familiar mixture of relief and exhaustion that came with each completed round of chemotherapy. Sister Margaret carefully removed the IV and provided the usual post-treatment instructions about monitoring for side effects and staying hydrated. The routine had become second nature, but the kindness behind the clinical efficiency never went unnoticed. The drive home was quieter than usual, Kate's energy depleted by the morning's treatment. William had learned to read these moods, knowing when to attempt gentle conversation and when to simply let the silence provide comfort. The countryside looked particularly beautiful in the afternoon light, the autumn colors just beginning to appear in the trees they passed. At Windsor, the children were waiting with their grandmother, who had become an invaluable support during the treatment period. Carol Middleton had essentially moved into the castle, providing stability and care that allowed William to focus on his dual roles as husband and future king. Her presence had been particularly important for the children, who needed the consistency of routine and affection while their parents navigated this challenging time. That evening, As Kate rested in bed with a cup of ginger tea and a book she lacked the concentration to actually read, William sat beside her sorting through the day's correspondence. Mixed in with official documents were dozens of personal letters from people around the world, sharing their own cancer journeys, offering prayers and encouragement, and expressing gratitude for Kate's openness about her treatment. One letter in particular caught their attention. It was from a young mother in Manchester who had been diagnosed with the same type of cancer just weeks after Kate's announcement. She wrote about how seeing Kate's strength and dignity during treatment had given her hope and courage for her own journey. She included a photograph of herself wearing one of the same style headscarves that Kate had been photographed wearing, saying it made her feel connected to someone who understood what she was going through. Kate carefully folded the letter and placed it in the special box where she kept the most meaningful correspondence from this period. These letters had become an unexpected source of strength, reminding her that her experience was not just personal, but part of a larger human story of resilience and hope. The final chemotherapy session arrived with a mixture of relief and lingering anxiety that surprised Kate with its intensity. After months of routine treatments, she had expected to feel only celebration at reaching this milestone. Instead, she found herself gripping William's hand tighter than usual. As they walked through the hospital corridors, one last time as patient and caregiver, Sister Margaret had prepared the treatment room with small touches that acknowledged the significance of the day. Fresh flowers sat on the windowsill, and a bottle of sparkling grape juice waited in the small refrigerator for after the treatment was complete. The nursing staff had become like family over these months, sharing not just medical care but genuine concern, encouragement, and celebration of each small victory along the way. William had brought a special playlist for this final session, filled with songs that had sustained them through the most difficult periods of treatment. As the IV was prepared for the last time, Kate found herself thinking about all the moments that had brought them to this point. The frightening initial diagnosis, the decision to go public with her illness, the overwhelming response from people around the world, and the gradual return of hope as her body responded to treatment. The children had insisted on making a countdown calendar for the final weeks of treatment, marking off each day with elaborate ceremonies and small celebrations. This morning, Louis had ceremonially removed the last number from the calendar and declared it a victory day, his young face serious with the importance of the moment. Charlotte had prepared a speech about how proud she was of her mother's bravery, while George had quietly slipped a handwritten note into Kate's handbag, expressing his love and admiration. Dr. Mitchell arrived during the treatment to conduct what she playfully called the graduation consultation. The latest scans and blood work showed remarkable improvement, with no detectable signs of cancer remaining in Kate's body. The conversation focused now on the monitoring schedule that would follow, the lifestyle adjustments that would support continued good health, and the gradual return to full activity levels. The discussion about returning to royal duties was both exciting and daunting. Kate's illness had forced a re-evaluation of priorities and scheduling that had ultimately created a more sustainable approach to their official responsibilities. The break from the relentless pace of royal engagements had allowed for deeper focus on fewer causes, more meaningful interactions with the organizations they supported, and better balance between public duty and family life. William had stepped up magnificently during Kate's treatment, taking on additional responsibilities while never making her feel that she was a burden or impediment to his work. Palace staff had marveled at his ability to manage increased duties while remaining constantly available for medical appointments, difficult conversations with the children, and the simple daily acts of care that had sustained Kate through the hardest months. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the treatment room. Prince Charles, now king, had insisted on being present for this final session despite the complex security arrangements required. His relationship with Kate had deepened significantly during her illness, moving beyond the formal courtesies of royal protocol to genuine affection and concern. He had visited regularly during her treatment, always bringing books he thought she might enjoy and stories designed to make her laugh. His presence during the final treatment carried particular significance. As the future queen consort, Kate's health was a matter of constitutional as well as personal importance. But Charles's visit was motivated by grandfatherly love rather than royal protocol. He sat quietly during the treatment, occasionally sharing gentle conversation but mostly just providing the comfort of family presence during this meaningful moment. The completion of the final treatment was marked with quiet ceremony. Sister Margaret carefully removed the IV for the last time, and Dr. Mitchell provided the official declaration that Kate had completed her prescribed course of chemotherapy. The sparkling grape juice was opened, and toast were offered by the medical staff who had become such an integral part of the family's journey. Kate had prepared brief remarks for the nursing staff, expressing gratitude that went far beyond the standard courtesies. These people had seen her at her most vulnerable moments, had provided not just medical care but emotional support, professional expertise, and personal kindness that had made an unbearable situation bearable. Their dedication had been absolute, their compassion genuine, and their skill life-saving. The drive home from the hospital carried a different energy than all the previous journeys. The weight of ongoing treatment had been lifted, replaced by the lighter but still significant responsibility of recovery and monitoring. Kate found herself noticing details of the London landscape that had been invisible during the months when her energy had been focused entirely on getting through each day of treatment. Windsor Castle came into view with its familiar towers and ancient walls, looking more like home than it had in months. The children were waiting at the entrance with banners they had made in art class, colorful declarations of welcome, home, and mummy is strong that had clearly been a collaborative effort with enthusiastic teacher supervision. The evening was spent in quiet celebration with close family members who had been such crucial support throughout the treatment period. Kate's parents had essentially relocated their lives to be available whenever needed, while William's family had provided both practical assistance and emotional encouragement. The bonds forged during these difficult months had created new depths of relationship that would endure long after the medical crisis had passed. As bedtime approached for the children, each one claimed special time with Kate to hear about the final treatment day and to ask questions about what would happen next. Their concerns were both touching and practical. Would Mummy still need to rest so much? Could they plan a proper family holiday now? When would her hair be long enough to braid again? Louis fell asleep in Kate's lap during story time, his small body completely relaxed against her for the first time in months. She had noticed that all the children had been slightly tense during her treatment, as if unconsciously bracing themselves for bad news. Now she could feel that tension beginning to ease, replaced by the natural confidence that comes when children feel secure in their parents' health and availability. Later, alone in their private sitting room, William and Kate shared the kind of conversation that only couples who have survived serious challenges together can have. They talked about lessons learned, relationships deepened, and perspectives forever changed by the experience of facing mortality and emerging victorious. They discussed how the experience would influence their future approach to royal duties, their relationships with their children, and their appreciation for the simple gifts of health and time together. Kate pulled out her journal, which had become a crucial outlet during treatment, and began writing what she knew would be one of the most important entries of her life. She wrote about gratitude for medical science and skilled caregivers, about the strength that comes from love and family support, and about the unexpected ways that sharing vulnerability had created connections with people around the world. Most importantly, she wrote about hope and the precious gift of a future that had seemed uncertain but now stretched ahead with renewed possibility. 6 months after completing chemotherapy, Kate stood before the mirror in her dressing room, preparing for what would be her most significant public appearance since her diagnosis. The annual charity gala that she and William hosted had been postponed during her treatment, and its return marked not just her recovery, but a new chapter in their approach to public service. Her reflection showed a woman transformed by experience, but not diminished by it. Her hair had grown back in soft waves that framed her face differently than before, and there was a depth in her eyes that spoke of battles fought and won. The dress she had chosen was elegant but comfortable, designed to allow her to move freely through what would be a long evening of public engagement. William appeared behind her in the mirror, adjusting his tie with the nervous energy that still accompanied their public appearances. The months of Kate's illness had changed him profoundly, deepening his understanding of vulnerability and strengthening his appreciation for the preciousness of ordinary moments. He had become more patient, more present, and more conscious of the weight that public duty could place on personal well-being. The gala was being held to launch the new foundation they had established during Kate's recovery, focused on supporting families affected by serious illness. The idea had emerged from the hundreds of letters they had received during her treatment, each one telling a story of struggle, hope, and the need for comprehensive support that went beyond medical care alone. The children had been involved in planning the evening, contributing ideas with the enthusiasm that only young people can bring to charitable endeavors. Charlotte had suggested that the centerpieces should include the same flowers that had brightened Kate's hospital room, while George had proposed that part of the proceeds should go toward purchasing comfort items for pediatric cancer wards. Lewis, with his characteristic directness, had simply declared that the party should make sick people happy. The car ride to the venue was filled with the familiar sounds of security coordination and last-minute briefings from their private secretary. But there was also something new in the atmosphere, a sense of purpose and authenticity that had been refined by their recent experiences. Kate no longer felt like she was simply fulfilling royal obligations. She was pursuing work that had grown directly from her own journey through illness and recovery. The media presence outside the venue was substantial, but the coverage had evolved during Kate's illness. The photographers and reporters had witnessed her vulnerability and strength, and their approach now carried a respect that went beyond professional courtesy. They understood that they were documenting not just a royal event, but a personal triumph and a new commitment to service born from lived experience. Inside the venue, the guests represented a carefully curated mix of medical professionals, families who had faced serious illnesses, representatives from established charities, and supporters who could help launch the new foundation effectively. Kate had insisted that the evening should feel like a celebration rather than a somber reflection on illness, wanting to emphasize hope and healing rather than dwelling on the difficulties of diagnosis and treatment. Dr. Mitchell was among the honored guests, accompanied by several members of the nursing staff who had cared for Kate during her chemotherapy sessions. Their presence added authenticity to the evening's mission and provided living examples of the dedicated professionals who made recovery possible. Kate had specifically requested that they be seated at the head table, a gesture that spoke volumes about her priorities and values. The speech Kate delivered that evening was perhaps the most personal she had ever given in public. She spoke candidly about the fear that had accompanied her diagnosis, the strength she had drawn from her family and medical team, and the unexpected ways that sharing her vulnerability had connected her with people she might never have otherwise met. Her words were carefully chosen to inspire without exploiting her own experience, to educate without sensationalizing the realities of serious illness. Most powerfully, she introduced several families who had written to her during her treatment, inviting them to share their own stories of facing illness with courage and grace. A young father spoke about caring for his wife during breast cancer treatment while managing 3 small children. A teenager described supporting her mother through chemotherapy while maintaining her own academic responsibilities. An elderly man shared how his community had rallied around him during his own cancer battle, creating a network of support that extended far beyond his immediate family. William watched these presentations with visible emotion, understanding that Kate had created something more meaningful than a traditional charity gala. She had established a platform where authentic human experience could be shared and honored, where the clinical aspects of illness were balanced with recognition of the emotional and practical challenges that families face together. The evening's fundraising exceeded all expectations, but more importantly, it established the foundation as a serious organization with clear mission and authentic leadership. The connections made that night between families, medical professionals, and potential supporters created a network that would extend the foundation's impact far beyond its formal programs and services. As the evening drew to a close, Kate and William stood together receiving the thanks and congratulations of their guests. Many people approached Kate with their own stories of illness and recovery, seeking not just her attention, but her understanding as someone who had walked a similar path. These conversations, while emotionally demanding, confirmed for Kate that her decision to be open about her illness had created opportunities for connection and support that would not have otherwise existed. The ride home to Windsor was quiet but satisfied, both of them processing the significance of the evening and its implications for their future work. Kate felt a sense of completion, not just of her medical treatment, but of a transformation that had taken her from patient to advocate, from someone who received care to someone who could help ensure that others received the support they needed. The children were asleep when they returned to the castle, but they had left drawings on Kate's bedside table, depicting the evening they imagined their parents had experienced. Charlotte's artwork showed Kate in her elegant dress surrounded by hearts and flowers, while George had drawn the whole family holding hands under a banner reading, "Helping People." Louis had contributed his characteristic stick figures, but had carefully written "Mummy Strong" in his developing handwriting. As Kate prepared for bed, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The diagnosis that had initially felt like an ending had become a beginning, opening new avenues for service and deeper connections with the people they were called to serve. The tears she and William had shed during the darkest moments of her illness had indeed become the nation's own, but they had also become tears of gratitude, hope, and renewed purpose. In her journal that night, Kate wrote simply, "Today we turned our pain into purpose, our fear into hope, and our private struggle into public service. The hardest chapter of our lives has become the foundation for the most meaningful work we will ever do." William reached for her hand as they settled into sleep, the gesture as natural and necessary as breathing. Together, they had faced the unthinkable and emerged not just intact but stronger, more compassionate, and more committed to using their position to serve others facing similar challenges. Their quiet tears had indeed become the nation's own, but they had also become something more powerful, a source of healing, hope, and renewed dedication to the work that lay ahead.